Sam Mack is hanging out with St John's this morning with some great information.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it, Koshi? We love checking in with our friends at St John Ambulance. For 138 years, they've been doing amazing work in the community. So many great volunteers keeping us safe, such as Paul here. Paul, I love the reason you got involved only a year ago. Tell us why you got involved with St John to volunteer.
Yeah, my son's really interested in becoming a paramedic or a registered nurse, and he was wanting some clinical experience. I said, well, why don't we sign up together, father and son, and volunteer and get out in the community and save a life together if we can, or at least help the community as best we can. Great time as a father and son. Great way to bond.
What a wholesome father-son activity. See, my dad would go, let's go to the pub and have a beer, and you're like, let's go and save some lives.
Do that too, don't worry.
That's so good. In a moment, we're going to see something which is very important. We're going to, obviously, most people are familiar with and know the basics of CPR, but we're going to talk about CPR during COVID times, which is so important.
Yes.
So some tips coming up after your weather. Let's get the crash course. COVID times, but you found someone in a scenario where CPR is required. What do we do?
Well, of course, emergencies don't stop just because of COVID, so we still have to save lives as best we can. The simple thing is wear a mask, gloves if you have them. We don't do mouth-to-mouth in terms of physical breathing during CPR in COVID times.
Yep.
So it's just compressions. So simply put your hand in the middle of the chest and then put your other hand on your wrist and then just pushing down 5 to 6 centimetres fairly fast, about 100 times a minute. And then just keep this going. You don't need to do any rescue breaths. You don't need to do any other sort of resuscitation.
And what about where your mouth is facing? Should you be trying to face away from them, or is that irrelevant?
Look, it's not that important. I think, by wearing a mask, you're protecting yourself as best you can. But the key is just to keep the compressions going, because compressions are the thing that keeps the blood circulating, keeps the oxygen circulating. Of course, make sure you call an ambulance.
Yes.
Do that early so that they're coming as fast as possible, lights and sirens. And make sure if there's a defibrillator in the building, get someone to get a defibrillator. But just keep the compressions going.
Yeah, so no mouth to mouth. And what about, so the patient, would you remove their mask or would you keep their mask on if they were wearing a mask?
I'd leave it on. Doesn't really make a difference.
Yeah.
Certainly a little bit more protection, but just keep the compressions going down and up. Just release a little bit so that the lung movements are actually pulling in the air, pushing out the air.
Yeah.
So you don't need to do it.
A quick side note on this one. This is great. Thank you for sharing this information with us. And there's a lot more on the website as well.
Absolutely.
It's so important to brush up on this. Babies,
yes.
Is it a bit different with babies in terms of you can still do mouth-to-mouth? You're required to do mouth-to-mouth?
We do. The Resuscitation Council in St John suggests with babies and small children you still do mouth-to-mouth because you want to give those little ones the absolute best chance you can. And their physiology is a little bit different. So compressions, 30 compressions, 2 breaths, 30 compressions, 2 breaths, same as adults, same as children, but with children we'll breathe for them as well rather than just do the compressions.
You're a champion. Thank you, Paul. Great information, guys. There we go. St John doing wonderful work.
Sam Mack, that is probably the most important segment I think you've done for months. That was so, not that your others aren't great, but that is so important. No, so important to know. Thanks, it's just fabulous.
Yeah, you can hire them to come to mothers groups, all sorts of groups. And
but the COVID version of doing it, I'd always wondered that. And when I was taught, with the compressions, you sing to yourself staying alive.
Yes.
Staying alive, and that's how you keep the count going.
And the worst case would be people not going to help because they're afraid. So that's wonderful advice.
It's just sensational.
Don't do nothing.
Thank you for that.